We're talking about why biodiversity is important, specifically to us as humans, in the form of ecosystem services. Given that we'll lose about 20% of the present species richness by the middle of the century, it's crucial to ask why that should matter to any of us. Should we be worried about that loss? And why do so many of us care so much about it already? There are three main ways in which biodiversity is crucial to humans. The first is by direct services, the second is by indirect services, and the third is the aesthetic or ethical effect. We get so many things directly from biodiversity on this planet: food, clothing, housing, transportation, many medicines and medical supplies, and even energy in some cases. These things are derived directly from various ecosystems. Food goes without saying. All of our major food types, as diverse as they might be, originated in diverse ecosystems. Turns out that there are wild types of tomatoes still growing in Peru. These Peruvian tomatoes are a different species from the kind of tomato that we typically eat and hold some of the genetic diversity within them. When bred with some of the tomatoes that we're using as our own food now, the yield from the hybrid tomatoes can go up almost as much as 50%. And we wouldn't have that productivity if we'd let that wild type of Peruvian tomato go extinct. If we didn't have that as part of the biodiversity out there today, there's no way that we would have access to that genetic diversity. Another direct service provided by biodiversity is shelter. Originally, we built housing out of all kinds of biological materials, and even today, we're still building houses out of trees. And what about medicine? Almost all of the medicines that humankind has developed have come directly from studying the way that organisms live in their environment, how they interact, and the chemicals that they use during those interactions. The rosy periwinkle is a very famous example of a plant that grows in some very secluded environments in Madagascar. And it turns out that this plant produces a couple of very interesting chemicals that are now used to treat childhood leukemia. And again, we wouldn't have those medicines if the rosy periwinkle had gone extinct. Some of the more interesting things that I think people forget about when thinking about the value of biodiversity fall under the category of indirect services that are delivered to us by healthy ecosystems. If you think about mangrove swamps, which are these fantastic places along the coastal margins of some tropical countries, where specific types of trees called mangroves, grow. Mangroves can grow in salt water, so they form a semi-marine forest at the edge between land and sea. There are many species of mangrove trees, and they're all really tough, resilient plants that provide tremendous services to us and to the natural environment. They protect the coastline from wave action and erosion. They're nurseries for all kinds of different types of organisms, and some of these are very important food types for us. Unfortunately, in certain parts of the world, people are destroying the mangroves in order to make shrimp fisheries. They remove the mangroves and set up shrimp farms with the idea that they're adding economic value to that part of the coastline by putting in a shrimp farm that's going to produce a commercially viable product. But if you look at a graph of the value of these things, the value of the shrimp farm is really only 1/3, maybe even only 1/4 of the value of the original undisturbed mangrove swamp because of the protection that the mangroves give against storms and erosion and the food sources they produce, such as fish. You can actually attach a dollar value to these things, which is sometimes the only way that people really come to grips with ecosystem value. It's the only way that people really understand the value of ecosystem services to humanity. Economic value of intact biodiversity has also been determined for ecosystems far from mangrove swamps, much closer to home. Some years ago, a large city on the East Coast, which shall remain nameless, except that it's New York, had an issue with the quality of its source water. There are rivers feeding into the New York City area, and the sources of that water were being compromised by pollution and environmental degradation to the point where biodiversity was being lost in some of those areas. So city officials had a question in front of them. How do we deal in a cost-effective way with this problem of declining quality of our water? It turns out that to build treatment plants to deal with cleaning the water up was going to cost somewhere in the neighborhood of $6 billion just to build the treatment plants. and then another $300 million per year to maintain those plants and make sure that they were doing the things that we were supposed to by removing the harmful chemicals that were being introduced through environmental degradation upstream. Then they looked at what it was going to cost to clean up and restore the environments to make sure that the ecosystems and the biodiversity in those ecosystems were maintained to the point where they were doing what they would naturally do by removing chemicals from the water, basically filtering it through wetland habitat. Wetlands are tremendous, tremendous places for the recycling of dangerous chemicals and for the removal of chemicals from water and for clarifying and cleaning water. The cost for this restoration was going to be about $1 billion spread over 10 years. Much, much lower cost. So the answer was pretty clear. You're going to go and spend that $1 billion over 10 years. Not only do you enhance the quality of the water in a very cost-effective way, but you do something else too. And that addresses the third and final aspect of biodiversity value, the ethical and aesthetic services or value provided by biodiversity. These services may in fact be, in some ways, the most important ones. Sure, we can attach dollar values to the direct and indirect costs of a decline in biodiversity and a decline in environmental services and ecosystem services, but the ethical and aesthetic value is something that's very, very difficult to put a price on. You might say, okay, well, it costs so much to go visit a park, or you might enjoy the view so much that you'll put a quarter into the telescope and soak in that environment, but that's not really what we're talking about. The value here comes in what we leave for the future. A drop in biodiversity, removal of biodiversity, the extinction of species, those are things that we can't repair. Lost biodiversity is something we cannot bring back. So our children are going to inherit a depleted world. The ethical and aesthetic quality of the environments that they're going to experience in their future is going to be decreased. How do you put a dollar value on that? We are the stewards of the environment, but we are also the major influence on environmental quality and certainly on ecosystem function these days through our activities that result in pollution and overfishing, habitat destruction, loss of certain species from the environment. No one wants a world that's filled with nothing but wheat, corn, dandelions, some cows, and us. That's a very simple ecosystem that's fraught with future difficulty and instability. If you reduce biodiversity to the point where the loss of species in the ecological food web causes an ecological collapse of that system, we won't be just standing by watching that collapse. We're going to be part of it. Clearly, biodiverse ecosystems are great places to live and to visit. There's much to see. They make you feel happy, restful, appreciative, full of awe, and reminded of what a remarkable and unique planet this is. After all, it's ours. I think there's a deeper sort of societal psychology at work here. And it behooves us to pay attention not just to the economically measured direct and indirect services and benefits provided by diversity-rich, healthy ecosystems, but also to the ethical and aesthetic value of those amazing environments that are the inheritance we will leave for future generations.
Measuring ecosystem services. What are ecosystem services? They are the collection of benefits a society enjoys from a range of resources and processes supplied by nature. This can include products like clean drinking water or processes such as the creation of alternative energy from biomass. Ecosystem services can be separated into three categories: provisioning services, like food, fiber, or alternative fuels; regulating services, like water, air, or pollution regulation; and cultural services, like recreation, aesthetic values, or just leaving stuff behind for future generations. So what does this all mean? Well, there's a challenge in meeting society's wants and demands. Basically, a lot of people need a lot of stuff, and what the land can provide is limited. So, if all of these people want all of these things, how do we know if we have enough? Where does it all come from, and how much of it is out there? Fortunately, there are talented people thinking about these challenges. The land can provide a whole bunch of products and services. With the right information, we can make decisions, like should an area be used for food or biofuel, or should it be developed for housing or reserved for parkland? For example, let's talk about biomass for energy and other bioproducts. Biomass is the mass of living biological organisms in an ecosystem. This can include trees, crops, vegetation, or any other renewable carbon-based organism. Biomass can give us bioenergy, biomedicines, bioproducts, and more. Biomass can be used as a credible alternative to fossil fuel-based products. So how do we make informed decisions about biomass solutions? First, we need the data about biomass. But that's where we hit our first roadblock. What's the problem? Well, there is some data, but it's not connected, or complete, or up to date. It might not be standardized, or could be at different resolutions. To overcome this, we need to develop a biomass inventory system. And thanks to Alberta Innovate's biosolutions, the work has already begun with the help of the Silvacom Group and Green Analytics. Once all of the data gets assembled into a cohesive framework, it's extrapolated to the province, which is when we map the data. This data can then give us a prospectus or detailed list of what biomass is available and where it is. This helps foster business growth and smarter decisions on how we use the land. In the future, this would be facilitated by serving data through an easy-to-use website, providing figures, maps, and other information to biomass buyers and sellers. So where do we go from here? Under the Alberta Innovates Biosolutions project, the Silvacom Group and Green Analytics have proven the idea with available data and identified gaps that need to be addressed. So now we need to create investment-grade data, a better data delivery system, and provide the business case data needed to launch the bioeconomy. And after that, we can focus on the rest of the ecosystem services. Getting the data right leads to making the right decisions. And when we do that, society will benefit from the wide range of resources and processes that encompass ecosystem services.
GRID and the James Hutton Institute explain payment for ecosystem services. This is Juan. He represents an environmental NGO in an area where local people sell firewood for a living. This is causing deforestation, and the landscape is being damaged. Also, wildlife is endangered, the quality of the soil is diminishing, and crop production and water supply are being reduced, affecting the life of people in a downstream village. What can Juan do to help prevent deforestation in this area? He hears about Payment for Ecosystem Services, or PES. PES is a tool that is used to help environmental conservation while preserving people's livelihoods. But how exactly does it work? PES is an instrument designed to help change the practice of people who carry out damaging activities, recognizing that if they do so, they contribute to providing services that are valuable to others. For example, downstream villagers can pay those who cut down trees to plant new trees and take care of the forest instead. This allows them to continue earning a living while improving the environmental conditions of their communities without damaging other communities. To make it work, the agreement needs to be beneficial for all parties. For those who invest in paying for the change of practice, the benefits need to be big enough to compensate for the money that they have invested. And for those who change their activity, the payment they receive has to be at least as large as what they were paid before the change. PES can only work where there is transparent institutional capacity, where resource access and ownership is not in dispute, and where there is a balanced distribution of power. PES needs to be part of policies and conservation programs that are designed with the participation of local communities. Juan and the local NGO have a potential area in mind where PES could work. After speaking with community leaders, they agree to start a PES system. A few years go by, and the communities are now thriving. Not only is it a more beautiful area, but food production and water supply are also secured. Scientific evidence is still being collected on how PES can ensure its benefits. Meanwhile, PES agreements are in place in several parts of the world, and there are expectations that they can help to improve environmental conditions. So it's really important to get it right. Payment for ecosystem services, an explanation by GRID and the James Hutton Institute.
Without nature, human life wouldn't be possible. We sometimes forget this basic principle. Even more often, we don't realise all the goods and services ecosystems provide us, from food, clean air and water, to shelter and medicine, mechanisms for climate regulation and pollination, just to mention a few. Our economies and our society's dependence on these natural resources is clearly underestimated. Yet globally, these services are worth trillions of euros.
Together, insect pollination benefits 75% of crops around the world, ensuring a secure supply of food and healthy and varied diets. In Europe alone, the pollination service to commercial crops is valued at €22 billion.
We are protecting biodiversity because it is the right and ethical thing to do, but also because it is in our self-interest.
But this valuable natural capital remains under threat, day after day. Mainly due to human activities, biodiversity is disappearing faster than ever. Ecosystems are constantly degraded, and their capacity to provide services is compromised. It represents enormous social and economic costs, mainly deflected to the poor and to future generations.
The real problem is that the value of nature's services is still largely invisible to decision makers in businesses and governments. And the principal reason is that the value of natural capital is not measured and therefore it's not valued.
Solutions based on nature instead of built infrastructure have proven to be cost-efficient ways of achieving the same or even better results, and at the same time creating more decent jobs while protecting the environment. We live on a finite planet and are fundamentally dependent on nature for our very existence. Recognizing the value of ecosystems and their services and seeing them as a part of the solution to societal challenges is the only way to ensure human well-being in the long term.
As a first step forward, the European Union, already committed to halting the loss of biodiversity and to restoring ecosystems, has launched MAS. This ambitious programme aims at mapping and assessing ecosystems and services provided all over the Union. The ultimate objective is to highlight the natural capital we have and the benefits it gives us. And then, to rethink our perception of wealth in order to live well within the limits of the planet.